Hey everyone, welcome back to MangaMinute. I'm thrilled to share my latest recap video with you. If you missed the previous one, no worries, just take a quick peek in the description below for the link. Now, let's dive right in and enjoy.
In the ancient era of Beijing Jinxiang, within the grandeur of the royal palace, the air hung heavy with the scent of incense. Wisps of smoke curled from burners placed meticulously at each corner of a grand, ornate bed, where a man lay motionless beneath the fine silk covers. His presence commanded the space, even in stillness. Lee Cheol-soo, a man of great stature and renowned as a formidable general, had chosen this bed as the center of an ancient and powerful ritual. The chamber buzzed with a sense of urgency, as attendants and ritualists moved with precision, finalizing the last stages of preparation. This was no ordinary ceremony. The reincarnation ritual, steeped in mysticism and known to bend the very fabric of life and death, had reached its pivotal moment. Every aspect of the setting was designed with purpose. Symbols etched into the floors, talismans hanging from golden threads, all meant to channel the ritual's power. All eyes were on Lee Cheol-soo. His face, stern and resolute, bore no signs of hesitation. Though his body remained still, his mind was set, prepared to embrace the weight of the decision that would follow. The time for preparation was over. In silent, unwavering command, he gave the final order to begin. Eunuch Lee Cheol-soo was a shadowy figure whose name echoed through the corridors of the modern Ming Empire. While the Empress sat upon the throne, her authority was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, a facade controlled by the true power behind the empire. Lee Cheol-soo. His influence permeated every corner of the imperial court, his hand in every decision made, manipulating the empire's politics as if they were pieces on a game board. Historians would later recall him as the worst villain in the empire's history, a man who moved emperors and ministers alike as pawns, steering the fate of the nation according to his whims. It was through his cunning and tireless efforts that the insignificant third princess rose to the position of emperor. His machinations were said to be so precise and ruthless that the common folk whispered he could make birds fall from the sky with a mere command. There was no challenge too great, no scheme too intricate for him to unravel and bend to his will. Yet, despite all his power and mastery over the empire's inner workings, there was one thing beyond his grasp, something his immense influence and brilliance could never fix. In the privacy of his chambers, where his power meant nothing, he was haunted by the one thing he could not do. No matter how he commanded the empire, he could not find solace in the most personal aspect of his life, his inability to experience pleasure as a man. Yuan Ha, the reigning empress of the Ming Empire, stormed into the chamber with an air of desperation. Her usually composed demeanor was shattered, her steps frantic as she rushed toward the grand bed where Lee Cheol-soo lay. Her eyes, brimming with tears, betrayed the emotions she could no longer hold back. The imperial guards and attendants stood frozen, uncertain of how to react to such a breach of decorum from their sovereign. The air, thick with the scent of incense from the ongoing ritual, seemed to close in around her, but the Empress's voice cut through it like a blade, her commands laced with urgency. Collapsing to her knees beside the bed, Yuan Ha's sorrow was palpable as she clutched at the silken sheets, her tears falling freely. The weight of her emotions hung heavily in the room as she lamented, her pleas filled with raw vulnerability. She, the mighty Empress, had everything within her grasp, wealth, power, and the authority to rule the empire. Yet, here she was, begging at the bedside of the one man who held her fate and that of the empire in his hands. Her voice, trembling and pleading, spoke of promises to give him anything he desired if only he would abandon the ritual that seemed to take him further from her with every passing moment. Lee Cheol-soo, the so-called old man, remained calm and unmoved by the emotional outpouring at his side. His expression, though softened by the weight of his decision, remained resolute. The ritual had already begun, and with it, the path he had chosen was clear. His thoughts were unwavering. He had long accepted his fate. Despite the Empress's desperate pleas, his sense of duty, his plan had been decided. He offered no comfort beyond his final words, a simple apology for leaving before he could serve her to the very end. Lee Cheol-soo's obsession with reclaiming his manhood and wanting to experience Segg ran deeper than anyone could understand. To the outside world, his actions seemed driven by power and ambition, but at the core of his relentless pursuit was a personal torment that had haunted him for over half a century. In his previous life, he had died young at just 28 years old, struck by the holy truck-kun while crossing a street in the modern world. What followed was a second chance at life, but not the one he had expected. He found himself in the martial world of Yongwon, where he lived for 50 years, eventually reincarnating as a 12-year-old boy. That much he could endure. But what came next was a fate far crueler than death itself. As Lee Cheol-soo stood frozen in fear, his heart raced at the sight of Wang Sam advancing toward him, scissors glinting menacingly in his kidnapper's hand. "No, go away. Don't come closer. Stay away." I said, "Stay away." Kidnapped by slave traffickers, Lee Cheol-soo was subjected to a horrifying ordeal. These were not ordinary traffickers but the vilest of their kind, those who castrated their captives and sold them as eunuchs to the imperial courts. Stripped of his identity and manhood, Lee Cheol-soo had been forced into a life he never chose. From that moment on, regaining what he had lost became his sole focus, the one thing that consumed his every thought and action. Despite his grim circumstances, Lee Cheol-soo never gave up. He clawed his way to power, orchestrating the rise of the third princess to Empress, all in the hope of meeting a renowned physician capable of restoring him. He mastered martial arts, achieving a level of prowess that made him the most formidable fighter within the imperial palace. His cunning and ambition knew no bounds, but despite all his accomplishments, there was one cruel truth he could not escape. Creating something out of nothing was impossible. No matter how powerful he became, no matter how rich or influential, he could never undo the physical loss that defined his existence as a eunuch. His martial mastery, his political dominance, all of it felt hollow without the manhood he so desperately longed to restore. Wealth, power, and martial prowess had become meaningless to Lee Cheol-soo in the face of his personal torment. What was the point of ruling the empire, of mastering the highest forms of combat, if he remained incomplete? His desire was not for control or riches, but for the simple pleasures of life that had been denied to him for so long. He yearned for the experiences others took for granted, a life filled with the intimacy and pleasures he had never known. That was why he had made his decision. Reincarnation was the only solution left to him. He would shed this broken body and be reborn into a new one capable of experiencing the pleasures he craved. His goal was clear: to live a life surrounded by the most stunning beauties, with countless wives and concubines. Nothing less would satisfy him. Only then, in a body restored to its full potential, would Lee Cheol-soo finally feel whole again. With a firm resolve, Lee Cheol-soo signaled to the attendants, ordering them to escort the Empress from the room. They obeyed without hesitation, gently leading Yuan-ha away as her tearful protests filled the air. She wept, her voice cracking with emotion, calling out to him with the familiar term she had used since childhood. To her, Lee Cheol-soo was not merely an advisor or eunuch, but someone who had stood by her side like a father, guiding her through every hardship. Her heart could not bear to see him leave this world so willingly, not when he meant so much to her. As the sound of her sobs faded into the distance, Lee Cheol-soo's thoughts lingered on her words. Even now, after ascending to the position of Empress, she still had moments of vulnerability, moments where the child he had known broke through the regal facade. They had been through so much together, every challenge, every struggle, and that history bound them more tightly than any formal titles ever could. To him, Yuan-ha had never been just a ruler. She was like family, a younger sibling whose tantrums he had grown accustomed to over the years. Her tears earlier had almost swayed him. For a brief moment, he had felt the weight of their shared past tugging at his resolve. But as much as he cared for her, he could not be moved by sentimentality. His decision was final. Yuan-ha, for all her beauty and status, was not someone he could ever view in a romantic or intimate light. She was family, not a woman he could desire. And that truth, more than anything else, was why he could not yield to her pleas. The shaman stood before Lee Cheol-soo, his words heavy with caution. The ritual about to be performed was no ordinary ceremony. It was a forbidden technique, one shrouded in mystery and peril. The risk was immense. Out of 100 who attempted it, 99 would die. The air seemed to still as the gravity of the shaman's explanation settled in the room. The weight of life and death hung on the decision Lee Cheol-soo would make next. Lee Cheol-soo, however, remained deep in thought. The warning did not surprise him. He had long accepted that the life he led, despite all its power and influence, was no life worth continuing. trapped in a body that had been mutilated and denied the very essence of what he sought. Each passing day felt more like a slow death. His existence, filled with wealth, martial prowess, and control over the empire, had lost all meaning without the fulfillment of his deepest longing. The ritual, with all its dangers, seemed a better option than the hollow existence he endured. His mind made up, he stared ahead with unshakable resolve. Life in its current form held no more value to him. The risk of death seemed almost irrelevant. If he could not reclaim what was taken from him, then there was no reason to live. Lee Cheol-soo had already tasted the heights of power, wielding influence over the empire in ways few could ever dream. He had accumulated vast wealth, spending fortunes on luxuries and schemes, yet none of it had brought him true satisfaction. His dominance over court politics and mastery of martial arts had left him untouchable. But even with all his achievements, an emptiness gnawed at him. The one thing that mattered most, the one desire that haunted him relentlessly, remained out of reach: his lost manhood. Everything he had attained felt hollow without it. Power, money, influence. None of it could fill the void left by the cruel twist of fate that had rendered him a eunuch. For Lee Cheol-soo, the possibility of being reborn and reclaiming what had been taken from him was worth any risk, any sacrifice. He would do whatever it took to regain his manhood, no matter how perilous the path. The chance to live again, whole and complete, was all that drove him now. Lee Cheol-soo slowly opened his eyes, his vision blurry as he adjusted to the light. A middle-aged man stood over him, his voice filled with concern as he called out. The man mentioned finding him collapsed near a pass, but Lee Cheol-soo's mind was still clouded with confusion. Where was he? His thoughts raced as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. As his vision cleared, recognition struck him like a bolt of lightning. The face before him, the voice. There was no mistaking it. It was Wang Sam, the very man who had ruined his life 50 years ago. The man who had castrated him and sold him into the imperial palace as a eunuch. Fury boiled within Lee Cheol-soo as memories of that brutal betrayal surged to the surface. He had heard Wang Sam had met a violent end, stabbed to death by bandits, but here he was, alive and standing before him. It was impossible, yet undeniable. A sudden realization hit Lee Cheol-soo with equal force. This wasn't reincarnation as he had expected. He hadn't returned in someone else's body. This was regression. He was back in his own body, in the time before his castration, reliving his past. His heart raced, and without a moment's hesitation, he checked under his pants. Relief and elation flooded him in an instant. His manhood was intact. The ritual had worked, though not in the way he had anticipated. Lee Cheol-soo had a second chance, a chance to rewrite the fate that had once destroyed him. Wang Sam's voice was filled with concern as he asked if the boy before him was hurt, his tone paternal and caring. Lee Cheol-soo, however, had no intention of being lulled by the false kindness. A sinister smile crept across his face, one that masked the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. He feigned innocence, thanking Wang Sam for saving him and mentioning a pain in his wrist. It was all part of his carefully crafted act. Unaware of the malice brewing beneath the surface, Wang Sam helped the boy to his feet. He spoke casually, offering to tend to the supposed injury and inviting him back to his home, where he claimed to have herbs that could help. His demeanor was warm, almost too warm, as if the man had ulterior motives. The moment Lee Cheol-soo heard those words, memories of his past life surged forward with undeniable clarity. His mind flashed to the day this very man had kidnapped him, castrated him, and sold him into a life of servitude as a eunuch. Now, standing before him once more, Wang Sam seemed none the wiser to the fate he had set into motion all those years ago. Lee Cheol-soo's expression twisted into something dark, his patience thinning as he snapped his fingers in mockery. He no longer needed to pretend. With a chilling tone, he retorted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. The mention of his manhood and the fate Wang Sam had sealed for him left the older man stunned. Wang Sam recoiled, his face paling at the accusation, his plans suddenly laid bare before him. The disbelief in his eyes was unmistakable. How could this boy know what he had intended to do? How could he be aware of a fate that had yet to unfold? Yet the truth was undeniable. The tables had turned, and Lee Cheol-soo, now armed with the knowledge of his previous life, would no longer be the helpless victim he once was. Wang Sam's disbelief and fear only fueled the fire of Lee Cheol-soo's vengeance. Lee Cheol-soo unleashed his fury upon Wang Sam, the man who had destroyed his life 50 years ago. With each strike, years of pent-up resentment poured out, fueled by the vivid memories of his suffering. Though he had only just regressed, the techniques of a top martial artist still flowed through him as naturally as breathing. The skills he had mastered in the imperial palace were as sharp as ever, and Wang Sam stood no chance against them. Wang Sam, beaten mercilessly, could only plead for mercy, his voice trembling with confusion and terror. He didn't understand why this boy, whom he thought he had saved, was now exacting such brutal vengeance. But for Lee Cheol-soo, the answer was clear. This was retribution long overdue. The memory of his own suffering, of being turned into a eunuch and robbed of his manhood, burned bright in his mind. The rage that had festered for half a century could no longer be contained. Lee Cheol-soo's voice, filled with venom, cut through Wang Sam's desperate cries. The injustice of hearing that his tormentor had died a simple death by a stab wound had haunted him for years. It had never felt like enough. He had longed for the moment to take matters into his own hands, to confront the man who had ruined him. Now that the moment had arrived, he was relentless. Every blow was an expression of the pain and regret that had consumed him, the life he had been denied because of this man's cruelty. 50 years. It had taken him 50 long years to reach this point. Even with all the power, wealth, and influence he had gained as a eunuch, none of it had brought him joy. The hollow existence of a man stripped of his identity, of his very essence, had left him unable to enjoy the fruits of his achievements. But now everything has changed. Whether this was reincarnation or regression no longer mattered. What mattered was that he was whole again, and he had the chance to rewrite his fate. The past, which had once chained him, no longer held him back. Wang Sam's defeat was more than just revenge. It was the beginning of Lee Cheol-soo's reclamation of the life he had been denied. With Wang Sam defeated and the weight of his tormentor's presence lifted, Lee Cheol-soo stood over the crumpled figure of the man who had caused him so much pain. A sense of triumph surged within him, electrifying every nerve in his body. He had regained not only his manhood through this regression but also a sense of purpose that had long been buried beneath years of suffering. In that moment, the world felt different. The air seemed charged with possibility, and the burdens of his past began to fade. Lee Cheol-soo had faced his demons and emerged victorious. The path ahead was no longer obscured by shadows of regret and loss. Instead, it shimmered with the promise of a future ripe with potential. A smile spread across his face, one filled with newfound determination and joy. He felt liberated, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had spent too long trapped in a life devoid of pleasure and fulfillment. Now, he was resolute in his commitment to live for the pleasures he had yearned for all those years. This was not just a declaration. It was a proclamation of his rebirth. As he took a deep breath, the scent of freedom filled his lungs. Lee Cheol-soo embraced the dawn of a new chapter in his life, one where he would seize every opportunity to indulge in the joys he had been denied. His journey had only just begun, and he was ready to grasp it with both hands, determined to savor every moment and reshape his destiny into one of fulfillment and excitement.